Hello, dear students. Today we are going to discuss functional anatomy of central nervous system, autonomic nervous system and peripheral nervous system. Basic concepts of temperature regulation of body. Before delivering the lecture, let's see what the main objectives of today's lecture are. To know how the different components of human nervous system coordinate and integrate with each other. To give a precise account about the general, structural and functional anatomy of the human nervous system. To outline different concepts about behavioral aspects of human beings associated with the nervous system. Identify the 12 cranial nerves, 31 spinal nerves and list their functions. To have a look on how is temperature regulated in different organisms. To know the role of hypothalamus in thermoregulation. First, let's have an introduction about the nervous system. Human nervous system consists of two subsystems, that is central and peripheral nervous systems. It's a part of nervous system which runs longitudinally along the axis of the body. It's located mid-dorsally, is hollowed and is being protected inside the axial skeleton of the body. Central nervous system consists of two parts, brain which is inside the cranium and spinal cord inside the vertebral column. Peripheral nervous system. It is that part of central nervous system which is made up of nerves and ganglia that come out of the nervous system and spread laterally. It consists of two types of pathways. First, afferent pathways carrying information to central nervous system. Second, efferent pathways carrying commands or responses from central nervous system, visceral nervous system. It is an involuntary part of peripheral nervous system, also called as autonomous nervous system. Regulates the activity of cardiac muscles, smooth muscles and glands. Neuroendocrine system is a composite system consisting of a network of endocrine glands where hormone secretion is regulated and controlled by commands from central nervous system. Brain is present in the head region inside the cranium, which is a part of our skull. It is the widest and the uppermost part of central nervous system. Human brain is about 1200 to 1400 grams in weight and constitutes about 98% weight of central nervous system. Now, structure of the brain. Structurally, brain is divisible into three parts. First is forebrain, which is also known as prosencephalon. It is the front and the anterior part of the brain and is formed of three main parts. First, olfactory lobes, that's rhinencephalon. They are a pair of small, solid, club-shaped structures which occur inferior to cerebral hemispheres so that they are visible only ventrally. Each olfactory lobe has an olfactory bulb and an olfactory tract. In lower animals, each olfactory lobe has a cavity called rhinocele, that's olfactory ventricle or first ventricle. It is absent in human beings, however. Now the functions. It's a seat of smell in lower animals, but in human beings, olfactory lobes take part only in relaying the stimulus of smell to temporal lobes of cerebral hemispheres. Now the second, that's cerebrum, or we call it as cerebral hemispheres. It's the largest part of the brain, constituting nearly 80% of the whole. Cerebrum is made up of two halves called cerebral hemispheres. The two cerebral hemispheres are separated by a deep longitudinal fissure. They are attached each other on the inferior side by a 10 centimeter thick curved band of about 200 million myelinated nerve fibers called corpus callosum. Anterior part of corpus callosum is folded back called genome. posterior part of corpus callosum, which is a knob-like structure called splenium. Now the third part, cerebral cortex and medulla. Grey matter forms 2 to 4 millimeter thick outer cortex of the cerebrum called cerebral cortex. It is made up of 6 layers having 10 billion pyramidal, granular and spindle neurons, which constitute about 10% of the total neurons of the brain. There are 3 types of specific areas of cerebral cortex. First, sensory, which has somatic sensations, hearing, vision. Next is motor, which include muscle movements. And last is association, that is, receiving and analyzing signals from a multiple of sensory motor and subcortical structures. Nerve fibers are generally myelinated so that the subcortical region appears white and opaque, which represents white matter called the cerebral medulla. Now let's move on to the midbrain, which is also known as mesencephalon. It's a small and middle part of the brain which contains groups of nerve cells scattered in white matter. A canal called iter or cerebral aqueduct connects third ventricle with fourth ventricle and is present inside the midbrain. Now midbrain has 2 parts, corpora quadrigemina being the first. They are 4 in number, 2 on each side as rounded swellings. Out of 4, the 2 swellings called superior colliculi or superior corpora control the visual reflexes, receiving impulses from the eyes and muscles of the head, so that eyes and head can be moved to focus an object. The rest 2 swellings, inferior colliculi or inferior corpora, controls the auditory reflexes, receiving impulses from ears and muscles of head so that ears and head can be moved to locate and detect the source of sound. Functions of corpora quadrigemina: it controls the sight and hearing reflexes. Crura cerebri, that's cerebral peduncles. They are fibrous tracts in 2 number present inferior side of the midbrain and connects the forebrain with the hindbrain, in turn connecting third ventricle with the fourth ventricle of medulla oblongata. Now moving on to the functions. It takes part in controlling muscle tone. Finally moving on to the hindbrain, that's also known as metencephalon. Hindbrain is composed of 3 parts. First is cerebellum, that's also known as epencephalon. It's the second largest part of brain which lies behind the cerebrum and above the medulla oblongata. Cerebellum literally means little cerebrum, which is well developed in human beings because erect posture requires extra effort in maintenance of balance. It consists of 3 parts, 2 lateral cerebral hemispheres and middle vermis. Cerebellum consists of grey matter outside and white matter from inside. Cerebellum bears 3 pairs of bundles of myelinated nerve fibers called cerebellar peduncles, which function as communicating link between cerebellum and other parts of the brain. Now let's move to the functions. It maintains the equilibrium of the body. It moderates the voluntary movements of the brain and controls the muscular activities like running, typing, talking, cycling, etc. It also maintains the muscle tone. Now moving on to the medulla oblongata, which is also known as myelencephalon. It's a cylindrical part of the brain that forms the hindermost part of the brain. Medulla oblongata has the 4th ventricle, which is continuous with iter in front and central canal of spinal cord behind. Posterior choroid plexus is formed by the fusion of non-nervous part of medulla oblongata and pia mater, which helps in the formation of cerebrospinal fluid. Right cerebral hemisphere controls the left side of the body and vice versa. Functions. Various involuntary movements of the body are under the control of medulla oblongata. It bears cardiac center for heartbeat regulation, a reflex center for secretion, vomiting, peristalsis, salivation, activity of alimentary canal, etc. is present inside the medulla oblongata. Medulla oblongata also bears vasoconstriction and vasodilation centers. Now, pons varoli. Pons means bridge in Latin. So, it is situated in front of the cerebellum, below the midbrain and above the medulla oblongata. It consists of nerve fibers which bridge the gap between the two hemispheres of the cerebellum. Now, functions. Like the midbrain, transmits messages to and from the spinal cord and cerebrum. Respiratory center known as pneumotaxic center or shutting center is present inside the pons varoli. Cerebrospinal fluid. It's a colorless and clear fluid that bathes the interior and exterior of brain and spinal cord. It resembles blood plasma in composition, containing protein, glucose, salts and other substances. It is secreted into the ventricles from where it circulates around the whole brain and spinal cord and is then reabsorbed into the venous sinuses of the body through the arachnoid matter. Now, functions. It assists in transportation of nutrients and removal of waste and toxic substances, keeps constant internal pressure and makes central nervous system moist. Picking off oxygen from blood and supplying the same to different parts of nervous system is facilitated by this cerebrospinal fluid. Cerebrospinal fluid acts as cushion in order to protect the central nervous system from external shock. Now, unique features of the human brain. The large-sized cerebral hemispheres are the areas where the centers of activities like memory, reasoning, intelligence, etc. are located. Increased area of cerebral cortex is due to the presence of gyri in cerebral hemispheres. Absence of rhinocele or first ventricle, presence of arbor vitae, pons varoli and 3 brain meninges, that is dura mater, arachnoid and pia mater for protection. Now, the peripheral nervous system. It's the lateral part of the nervous system which connects different parts of the body with central nervous system along with their various receptors and effectors. It consists of 12 pairs of cranial nerves and 31 pairs of spinal nerves. Now first let's discuss cranial nerves. Cranial nerves arise from the brain and comes out of the cranium through apertures called foramina. There are 12 pairs of cranial nerves in human beings which are as under. Olfactory nerves. These nerves are sensory in nature, pick up sensation of smell and pass it to the temporal lobes of cerebral hemispheres for interpretation. Optic nerves arise from thalami of diencephalon. These are sensory in nature, pick up sensation of sight from the retina and transfer the sensation to the temporal lobes of cerebral hemispheres for interpretations. Oculomotor nerves. They arise from floor of midbrain, innervate retina of eyes, tear glands and ciliary muscles of eyes. The nerves are motor in nature and control the rotation of eyeballs, size of pupil and accommodation of eye. Pathetic or trochlear. The most slender and the smallest of all the cranial nerves. These nerves arise from the midbrain, help in movement of eyeballs and are motor in origin. Trigeminal nerves. These arise from ventral surface of pons varolii, bear trigeminal ganglion at its base, and it then bifurcates into 3 bronchs. It's the largest cranial nerve, also known as the dentist nerve. The 3 bronchs are as under: ophthalmic, which is sensory nerve supplying the lacrimal glands, conjunctiva of the eyes, eyelids, forehead, anterior part of the scalp, and mucous membrane of the nose. Maxillary. These are the sensory nerves which are distributed to the lower eyelids, upper lip, upper teeth, and cheeks. Mandibular. It's mixed in nature. It controls the movement of lower jaw and tongue, hence helping in mastication of food. Moving back to the cranial nerves, that's the abducens nerves. Originate from floor of pons, are motor in origin and helpful in movement of eyeballs. Facial nerve. The nerves are mixed in nature and control the facial expression with the help of mimetic muscles. These nerves control secretion of salivary glands, tear glands, and sense of taste from tongue except bitter. Auditory nerves. These originate from sides of pons and consist of 2 branches. First is vestibular branch. It helps in maintaining the balance. Second is cochlear. It helps in hearing. Glossopharyngeal nerves. These originate from sides of medulla oblongata and helps in perceiving taste, salivation, and swallowing. They are mixed nerves. Vagus nerve. It's pneumatogastric nerve. They arise from sides of medulla oblongata and control the functioning of internal visceral organs like muscles of larynx, heart, blood vessels, esophagus, stomach, intestines, and pancreas. They are mixed cranial nerves. Spinal accessory nerves. These nerves cause movements of neck, shoulder, and visceral reflexes. They are motor in nature. Hypoglossal nerves. They control the movement of tongue and are motor in origin. Spinal nerves. These nerves develop from the spinal cord and supply all parts of the body not covered by the cranial nerves. These nerves come out of the vertebral column through intervertebral foramina. They are all mixed nerves. Spinal nerves are divided into 31 pairs. 31 pairs of spinal nerves are classified into 5 groups. Cervical, which are 8 pairs. Thoracic, 12 pairs. Lumbar, 5 pairs. Sacral, 5 pairs. And finally coccygeal, which is only 1 pair. Now we will discuss autonomic nervous system. It's a self-governed system of peripheral motor nerve fibers and ganglia, which control involuntary activities of various visceral organs and glands to stimulate, accelerate, and stop their functions without directly consulting the will. Also known as visceral nervous system, it has 2 opposing divisions, sympathetic and parasympathetic divisions. Sympathetic nervous system, also called as thoracolumbar outflow, it originates from rami, communicates of all thoracic and first 3 lumbar spinal nerves. It consists of chain of different types of ganglia. First, chain of lateral ganglia. There are 2 ganglionatic chains originating from neck to pelvis on either side of the vertebral column and each bearing 21 sympathetic lateral ganglia. Second, preganglionic fibres. The nerve fibers arise from lateral horns but come out through ventral roots separating in the region of bifurcation of spinal nerves and are cholinergic in origin. Third, collateral or prevertebral ganglia. These are long preganglionic nerve fibers called symplectic nerve fibers come out of lateral ganglia instead of ending in them. Fourth, postganglionic fibers. The nerve fibers innervate involuntary muscles, glands and different body parts or visceral tissues. The nerve fibers or adrenergic provide excitation through secretion of sympathetin. However, postganglionic fibers innervating sweat glands are cholinergic. Now the functions. It coordinates the activities of a number of body organs. It takes active role in the activation of adrenal glands to meet an emergency, constricts peripheral blood vessels and increases heartbeat as well as blood pressure. It involves in erection of hair during emergency, dilation of pupil and relaxation of urinary bladder. It also helps in temporary decrease in peristalsis of gut, small intestine and inhibits digestive gland secretions. Now moving on to parasympathetic nervous system. It arises from 3rd, 7th, 9th, 10th, 11th cranial nerves and 2nd, 3rd and 4th sacral spinal nerves, hence also known as craniosacral outflow. As a part of autonomous nervous system, it helps in performing daily activities of various organs, preventing their overexploitation and conserving body heat. It consists of chain of 4 different types of ganglion fibers. These are parasympathetic ganglia. They are separate ganglia which occur in close association with the visceral organs and glands. There are additional ganglia which occur in head, ciliary from 3rd cranial, sphenopalatine and submaxillary from 7th cranial. Second is preganglionic fibers. The nerve fibers are cholinergic, developed from 3rd, 7th, 9th, 10th and 11th and 2nd, 3rd and 4th sacral spinal nerves. Preganglionic fibers of 3rd, 7th and 9th cranial nerves remain restricted to head region, whereas those of 10th and 11th cranial nerves reach up to thoracic and number of abdominal organs, while the ones from sacral spinal nerves pass on to large intestine, reproductive organs and other parts of the lower body. Third, postganglionic fibers. They are very short, lie very near to visceral organs and other areas of innervations. The nerve fibers are cholinergic. Functions. It increases the peristalsis in intestine, reduces the blood pressure and hence slowing down the rate of heartbeat. It promotes the secretion of digestive glands as well as salivation. Now, let's move on to the thermoregulation or temperature homeostasis. One of the most important examples of homeostasis is the regulation of body temperature. Not all animals can do this physiologically. Animals that maintain a fairly constant body temperature, for example birds and mammals, are called endotherms, while those that have a variable body temperature, all other taxa, are called ectotherms. Endotherms normally maintain their body temperatures at around 35 to 40 degrees Celsius, so are sometimes called warm-blooded animals. But in fact, ectothermic animals can also have very warm blood during the day by basking in the sun or by extended muscle activity, for example, bumblebees and tuna. The difference between the two groups is thus that endothermic animals use internal corrective mechanisms, whilst ectotherms use behavioral mechanisms. For example, lying in the sun when cold moving into the shade when hot. Such mechanisms can be very effective, particularly when coupled with internal mechanisms to ensure that the temperature of the blood going to the vital organs like brain and heart is kept constant. In humans, body temperature is controlled by the thermoregulatory center in the hypothalamus. It receives input from two sets of thermoreceptors. Receptors in the hypothalamus itself monitor the temperature of the blood as it passes through the brain, that's the core temperature. And the receptors in the skin, especially on the trunk, monitor the external temperature. Both sets of information are needed so that the body can make appropriate adjustments. The thermoregulatory center sends impulses to several different effectors to adjust body temperature. Our first response to encountering hotter or colder condition is voluntary. If too hot, we may decide to take some clothes off or to move into the shade. When too cold, we put extra clothes on or turn the heating up. It is only when these responses are not enough that the thermoregulatory center is stimulated. This is a part of autonomic nervous system, so the various responses are all involuntary. When we get too hot, the heat loss center in the hypothalamus is stimulated. When we get too cold, it is the heat conservation center of hypothalamus which is stimulated. Thanks. Well, I really hope that you have understood the lecture.